What if I told you that Bloodsport was never supposed to exist? Between budget problems, ego clashes, impossible schedules, and an almost chaotic shoot, this movie was destined to vanish before it was ever born. On screen, we saw spectacular fights and unbelievable kicks. But behind the cameras, there was a story written in blood, sweat, and a dream on the verge of breaking. By the mid-1980s, Bloodsport was a movie with no budget, no convinced studio, and much less a leading man capable of carrying it on his shoulders. And far from seeing in Van Damme the chance to save the film, it was the complete opposite. Think about it for a moment. A young, unknown Belgian who barely spoke English, had no money, no acting experience, not even a stable place to sleep. The only things he carried were some photos from his karate days, a pair of nunchucks, and a willpower that couldn't be broken.
Teach me. I can do it.
You are not Japanese. You are not a Tanaka.
You told me using any technique that works. Never to limit myself to one style. To keep an open mind.
This young Belgian slept in rundown cars, made a living with occasional jobs like delivering pizzas or installing carpets, and still found the strength to train every day, holding on to the only treasure he had left, a dream that seemed unreachable. What nobody suspected was that, before showing his impossible kicks and explosive fights on screen, Van Damme would have to face a much more powerful rival, the film industry itself. A silent war that not only put the birth of Bloodsport at risk, but also the chance to fulfill his destiny. Jean-Claude Van Damme didn't get his chance through a formal audition or a studio call. His big opportunity came in a parking lot, at a moment as unexpected as it was unlikely. One afternoon, while walking near a restaurant in Los Angeles, he saw Menahem Golan, producer and co-founder of Cannon Films. Without thinking twice, he approached, introduced himself as a martial artist, and launched into an improvised demonstration right there on the sidewalk. He finished with an impressive 360-degree flying kick that stopped just inches from Golan's face. That bold act sparked interest, but it wasn't a direct ticket to stardom, only a small step on a path filled with doubts, rejections, and obstacles that seemed impossible to overcome. For many, the story of Bloodsport was little more than a fanciful rumor based on urban legends and questionable tales. The studio didn't want to risk more than a minimal budget, and no one believed the film would ever be completed. The young Belgian dreamer had to fight to keep the movie from being scrapped from its very foundations. With no money to hire top fight choreographers or effects that could give it shine, every fight scene had to be improvised with the little they had, and there was practically no room for error. The shoot became a true race against time, marked by constant pressure and a severe lack of resources. Every obstacle felt like a reminder that Bloodsport was doomed to vanish before it was even born. Yet it was precisely that adversity that turned the movie into a personal challenge for everyone involved, who poured every drop of effort, sweat, and blood into bringing it to the screen. When filming finally began, Bloodsport found no relief. On the contrary, it was only the start of a far worse storm. Far from the comfort of Hollywood, in the hectic streets of Hong Kong, the production turned into a minefield. The crew was small and working with limited resources. Cultural and language barriers meant that almost every instruction had to be interpreted and repeated several times. The American technical team mixed with the local crew, and communication was a constant challenge. Equipment often arrived late or incomplete, and filming locations were scarce and frequently improvised. The cast was made up of an unusual mix of bodybuilders, martial artists, and inexperienced actors. Among them stood out Bolo Yeung, the imposing villain Chong Li, famous for his strength and toughness, who didn't always hold back his punches. The fights were intense and authentic. There was no room for stunt doubles or extended rehearsals. The risks of injuries, accidental impacts, and even paralysis from falls were far more likely than the production's actual success. The young Belgian actor, a martial arts specialist and second-degree black belt in karate, used to training with millimeter-perfect precision, was forced to improvise, adapt to the chaos, and put his body in more danger than he had ever imagined. Every fall hurt for real. Every strike carried a risk. There was no protection, only concrete hidden beneath a thin mat. The filming schedule was relentless. A single mistake could mean days of delay, something the production simply could not afford. There was no room for fatigue or recovering from injuries. The pressure was suffocating, and more than one person began to think that finishing the movie was an impossible goal. In a typical action movie, fight scenes are carefully planned, stunt doubles, weeks of rehearsals, and protective gear to prevent injuries. But in Bloodsport, none of that was available. Van Damme performed all of his fights without doubles. Every kick, jump, and punch was real. The limited budget and his obsession with showing what he could do forced him to risk his body again and again. From the very first week of shooting, the tension was palpable. Precision with the technical crew was hard to maintain. One mistake could have serious consequences. Real injuries happened all the time. An elbow grazed his temple dangerously. A fall nearly tore a tendon. And there were no doctors on set, only ice and aspirin. The most iconic scenes, like the blindfolded fight after being attacked with powder in the eyes, required weeks of obsessive practice. Extreme balance, total focus, and a will of steel were needed to make sure nothing went wrong. There was no time to redo shots. If someone failed, the camera kept rolling. Van Damme endured the pain, visible in every bruise and strike, and didn't stop until he got the perfect take. The toughness and realism in those fights didn't just define the movie, they put the physical and mental well-being of everyone at risk. Bloodsport went from being a low-budget project to becoming a legend, because in every scene there was one thing that couldn't be faked: real sacrifice. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, it seemed like the worst was over, but the toughest battle was just beginning, not in front of the cameras, but in the editing room. Before we dive into this part of the story, I invite you to subscribe if you enjoy discovering behind-the-scenes details and support me with a big like. Comment Bloodsport and I'll give you a shout-out in the comments. Let's continue. The first cut of Bloodsport was a cold shock for Jean-Claude and the team. Without his input, Canon Films had assembled a version that was too long, too slow, and lacking the frantic pace the story demanded. The fights didn't flow, the dramatic scenes lacked impact, and the energy had been drained along the way. The studio executives were frustrated. Some even left the room before the screening ended. The word embarrassing quietly circulated, and soon there were talks of Bloodsport being canceled, buried as just another low-budget flop. But Jean-Claude was not about to give up. With no experience or team, he requested to get involved in the editing. Day and night, alongside editor Carl Kress, he went frame by frame, seeking to bring life and pulse back to the film. He cut unnecessary scenes, sharpened the fight sequences, and found the perfect balance between action and emotion. His instinct for timing, honed through years of martial arts training, proved more valuable than any technical skill. He transformed a dying film into a movie that beat to the rhythm of combat, with iconic moments that today stand as benchmarks in martial arts cinema. When Bloodsport finally hit theaters in 1988, it wasn't with fanfare or grand advertising campaigns. In fact, the film went almost unnoticed, with minimal marketing and low expectations from the studio. On paper, it seemed like just another cheap action movie destined to get lost on video store shelves or during late-night TV reruns. Jean-Claude Van Damme was still an unknown name, without agents to push his career, without support behind him. The future looked uncertain, and the chance of failure was high. Yet something unexpected happened. The movie began to gain attention through word of mouth, first among small circles of martial arts fans, and gradually beyond. Its fight scenes, raw and authentic, the intensity of the battles, and the unstoppable energy of that young Belgian, unknown, with more heart than acting talent, resonated deeply with audiences. VHS sales and rentals skyrocketed, and Bloodsport quickly became a cult phenomenon. Suddenly, the film that should never have existed emerged as a milestone that defined an era in martial arts cinema and catapulted the young Belgian dreamer to fame. Bloodsport wasn't just a movie, it was a test of endurance, an epic behind-the-scenes battle that almost faded into oblivion. The story of how it survived against all odds reflects the indomitable spirit of those who fight for their dreams. Jean-Claude Van Damme didn't just play the hero on screen, he was the real hero of this story, facing challenges far beyond any fight choreography. His sacrifice, passion, and conviction transformed a production destined to fail into a cultural icon. Today, Bloodsport is more than just a martial arts film. It is proof that sometimes the stories that should never have existed, those that seem impossible to tell, are the ones that end up inspiring generations. What made it possible for Bloodsport to reach the screen wasn't luck, but Jean-Claude Van Damme's obsession. When he had barely a 1% chance of success, he trained. On days he went without food, he trained. On nights he had nowhere to sleep, he trained. When money ran out and opportunity seemed out of reach, he kept training. The legend of the young Belgian dreamer is living proof that opportunities don't just appear, they are created. If you found this story inspiring, wait until you discover the details about Van Damme's idol. Do you know who Van Damme's idol is? That's right, Bruce Lee. In that video, I'll talk about his legacy and the real reason why the Dragon never participated in tournaments. It will leave you in shock. Many say he didn't compete in tournaments out of fear, but the truth behind this story will leave you speechless. I'll leave the video on the screen, and by the way, subscribe if you're a fan of these stories. See you in the Bruce Lee video.